KIDO Talk Radio, Kevin Miller in the morning. Thank you all for joining us. Our great friend Robert Spencer joining us from Jihad Watch, and of course, best-selling author. In addition to Jihad Watch, he's always in the news. Robert, I think, Mr. Spencer, one day I think you'd probably like to retire. You live a stressful life.
Well, yeah, it has to be done. Somebody's got to do it, you know. I never really expected to be doing this, but I don't see a whole lot of people calling attention to the ideology behind the jihad threat, and there's a lot of misinformation about it, so it has to be done.
Well, let's talk a little bit about yourself. How did you become involved in watching the jihad?
Well, it was actually because I was working on a couple of books back in the early part of the last decade, and I wanted to find a place that would have all the jihad news all together. And there wasn't one, so I thought, well, I'm just going to have to do it myself.
And what was the reaction to it?
The reaction has been, some people say, hey, this is a great resource, and thank you. And other people say, wow, this is so terrible and evil and racist. Of course, jihad terror is not a race, and everybody sane should be opposed to it. But I've found that there are quite a lot of people who think that they've fallen for the propaganda that there's something wrong with opposing jihad terror and Sharia oppression.
Well, my favorite thing is you take a look at some of the social media outlets, and they let the terrorists run wild and free, but they seek to eliminate you from any of their platforms.
Well, this is another odd thing, yeah, and that actually comes from a lot of their international connections. It's not very well known. It was not reported in the American media, but it was reported in the Turkish media, and that's where I saw it, that the vice president of Facebook, Joel Kaplan, actually traveled to Pakistan in 2017, and he met with the Pakistani Interior Minister, Chaudhry Nisar Ali Khan, and he promised that Facebook would work to counter and erase and block all anti-Islam material. Now, as far as I'm concerned, what I'm doing is not anti-Islam or anti-anything. It's trying to call attention to a genuine threat that all people of goodwill, Muslim and non-Muslim, should be opposed to and try to resist. But the general line on it is that to oppose terrorism is anti-Islam and anti-Muslim and so on. So he was promising that all that would be erased from Facebook, and I am very blocked there. And, of course, the other social media giants have also fallen into this kind of behavior, and they behave as if there's something wrong with opposing jihad terror, and this is what they promised the Pakistani government they were going to do.
Well, Mr. Spencer, I love telling this story because it happened when we were in Washington, D.C. at FAIR. We had a radio station in Birmingham. A buddy of mine told me about it. He posted a picture of you on Facebook, and it was taken down within, a couple minutes.
Yep, there you go. It's as if the real villains are those, not the jihad terrorists, but those who oppose them.
Robert Spencer joining us, Jihad Watch, his new book, The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. Do you agree with our intelligence or what we're getting with the media that ISIS is done?
Well, ISIS is done in terms of controlling a large territory in Iraq and Syria. In 2015, they controlled a territory larger than Great Britain. It looked as if, at the end of the Obama administration, that they were there to stay. Probably if Hillary Clinton had won, certainly if Hillary Clinton had won, they would still control a considerable expanse of territory in Iraq and Syria. But Trump rolled them up very quickly. The thing is, though, that there were 30,000 foreign fighters who went over to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS in its heyday. And most of those guys are still alive, and a lot of them have come back. A lot of them are trying to come back. There's been a full court press in the establishment media to allow them to come back, which is very strange. It's saying, you're trying to guilt trip us into allowing traitors who have openly joined a group that has repeatedly declared its intention to destroy the United States and has called upon Muslims in the United States to mount lone wolf attacks, and they want us to bring these guys back. But a lot of them are coming back.
Well, Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio on 107.5 FM, 580 AM. So what's the appeal? We keep hearing about these folks watch the social media. The social media, by the way, Mr. Spencer, as you say, you've been banned from, but is actively used to recruit these radicals. What's the appeal of living this life of an ISIS fighter?
Well, the appeal for the ISIS fighters is that they are serving God. They think that in doing this, they're going to get great blessings. They think that this is something that is going to bring them heavenly rewards and also prosperity in this life, because in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, it promises rewards in this world as well as in the next for serving Allah. And the best way to serve Allah, according to the Quran and Islamic tradition, is by jihad.
And even you've got suburban kids in America and Europe. How does that work?
Well, sure. I mean, it's there's a lot of dissatisfaction in general with the shallow materialism that dominates the culture. A lot of people are looking for something that will give their life a greater meaning, and the problem is that they find it all too often in this ideology and belief system that leads them into embracing violence. But that's how the proselytizers and recruiters for jihad, how they market themselves and how they sell themselves to young people. They tell them that this is the true religion and this is how you can get the great rewards from God, which are superior to everything else.
Indeed, and then you have a lot of these females that become enamored with it. They go and they think they're going to have a life. But, Mr. Spencer, what's it like for these women that go marry these ISIS folks? It can't be good compared to how they have it in the West, right?
Well, materially, no. But they don't care about that or they wouldn't have gone in the first place. And it's clear from the statements of many of these ISIS brides who have surfaced in the last few days and have been asking to come back. And they are clearly unrepentant. They say it was great. You know, we lived according to the rules of Islam, and this is the right way to live. The beheadings and the oppression, all that didn't bother them because they figured that this is all the will of Allah. This is what the Quran commands, and so this is right to do. And so they only are trying to come back now because the whole thing fell through. If it were still going strong, we wouldn't be hearing from them.
Well, and this is the thing that fascinates me, though, that the appeal of the Quran, and we've been having this battle of ideals for years, but why all of a sudden this interest in, making these Western men and women converting to a religion that is very counter to what they've grown up with?
Well, sure. Well, although, of course, a lot of these people, they did grow up Muslim in the United States, and they were taught that jihad was the best thing to do and so on. These things were all part of the religion in the United States as much as anywhere else. These things also are used to appeal to converts, that they will tell them that this is this great, wonderful calling and so on. And so, it is an appeal that does have a resonance among a lot of young people because it is a sharp contrast to the materialism of the larger culture and does offer some great meaning to their lives, or claims to anyway.
Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller in the Morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM, the history of jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. Now, Afghanistan, what's going on there?
In Afghanistan, we are still there, and not really sure that that's a good idea. Afghanistan is a place where whenever we go, whenever we leave, there's going to be the Taliban in power, because the Taliban is the group that has the most popular support in the country, and they are the most violent and ruthless. And so the idea that we have to stay in order to keep the Taliban out of power is only delaying the inevitable. What we need to do is reformulate what we're doing in Afghanistan so that we can contain the Taliban and keep it from establishing al-Qaeda training camps like it had before 9/11, keep it from exporting jihad, but give up on trying to keep it out of Afghanistan. There's just power in Afghanistan. This is never going to happen. It's a waste of American resources.
Now, how is life different in Afghanistan than and what we refer to here, or what we can relate to in the United States? They've called that country the graveyard of empires for years.
Yes, this is true. They beat the British, they beat the Soviets. They will ultimately claim victory over the Americans. Of course, every time we actually fight them in battle, we win. But the problem is that these people consider themselves to be fighting a 1,400-year-old struggle. And so they don't give up that easily. They don't think, oh, we lost this battle, we should surrender and end this war. They think, well, we'll fight again tomorrow, we'll fight again next year, we'll fight again in 10 years, and we'll beat them then. And so this is the thing. We either stay there forever, or we formulate some way to fight them more strategically and more effectively.
Of course, I guess that's easier said than done. And then you have, Mr. Spencer, from what we understand, when you start educating the females, the women there, the Taliban, they don't like that.
Yeah, that's certainly true. They certainly don't. If you educate women in Afghanistan, you're putting their lives in danger. And so this is kind of a double-edged sword for Americans, that they say, well, we have to make sure that the girls can go to school. But the girls might get killed as a result of that. And this is no exaggeration. This is not some facile throwaway statement. This has happened all too often, that girls' schools get shot up, students are killed, and so on. Of course, the famous Nobel Prize winner, Malala Yousafzai, she was shot in the head while going to school, and this is why she was shot. And so this is something that we need to recognize, that we're not going to be able to change this society or make it into something like a Western-style secular republic. We haven't even made any effort to do so, as a matter of fact. It's all just been about trying to keep the Taliban out of power. If we did try to establish, to defend Western mores there would be a lot of pushback. There would also no doubt be a lot of Afghans who would support us. But this attempt has not been made, and is likely not going to be made. And so the sooner we try to figure out some better way to deal with this, the better off we will be.
Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning, Jihad Watch, jihadwatch.org. Coming up, we'll talk about his latest publication. But, you know, is there a way to piece out of Afghanistan without making it what it once was?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we can in the sense that what it once was Al-Qaeda training camps and so on. That we can stop. Or we can make sure that none of the people who are in those camps end up in the United States or in Europe. But we're not going to be able to keep Afghanistan from being a Sharia state. And indeed, we haven't even tried. The Karzai government and the succeeding government, they are operating according to a constitution that is based on Islamic law. And so the same principles that led to 9/11, we ended up enshrining in the Afghan constitution. It's ultimately self-defeating, and ultimately it's not really something we should be propping up.
More coming up next with our great friend Robert Spencer. You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. KIDO Talk Radio, Kevin Miller in the morning, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Robert Spencer joining us from Jihad Watch. So we were talking about Afghanistan, out of sight, out of mind, Mr. Spencer. With your group, Jihad Watch, you travel the country, you write publications, you hold these folks accountable. What's the biggest threat? Is it coming out of Iran? Is it coming out of Iraq? Or perhaps Syria?
Well, there are several. There are two, actually. I would say there are two that are the biggest threats. One of them is Iran, and Iran is a threat in multifaceted ways that are not often fully appreciated. Iran, for example, is a great sponsor around the world, not just of jihad terror groups, but also of leftist groups that, if they gained power, would be catastrophic for Western societies, which is why Iran supports them. So you have, for example, it was discovered not too long ago that Iran was supporting a communist government, not a government, a party, a far left party in Spain, that had nothing to do with Islam, nothing to do with Iran, but they're on the Iranian payroll because they're useful to the Iranians in their ultimate goal of subverting and destroying Western society and American society in particular. And so you have that, and also that they fund Hezbollah and other jihad terror groups. It must be noted that Hezbollah is very active in northern Mexico, working with the drug cartels, and they are working with the drug cartels ultimately in order to come across the border. And so that's a big threat. Then you do have ISIS and Al-Qaeda on the other hand. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they are a very different kind of thing from Hezbollah and what the Iranians are doing. The Iranians are working for long-term subversion, whereas the Sunni jihad groups, notably ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but also others, want to sow mayhem in American society by means of terror attacks, such that ultimately law enforcement is overwhelmed and collapses, and the government itself is destabilized. This is also a long-term project, but one that is a bit more showy because we end up with these lone wolf jihad attacks, shootings and stabbings and random attacks here and there. And so these are both grave concerns. Neither one of them has gone away. They're both very much with us.
Robert Spencer is our guest, jihadwatch.org, his website. Check it out for more information. Kevin Miller with you, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Back to Iran, it seems so puzzling to me that we hear so many reports, and of course you have the insight on the ground, that the people there want to be westernized, want to have liberty, but you've got the mullahs running it. And Mr. Spencer, folks like us, we've got miles on the odometer. We remember what happened in 1979.
Absolutely, yeah. And what's happened in 1979 can be reversed, and it's in the process of being reversed. The Western press doesn't cover it very much because, of course, the Western press is only interested really in subverting the West itself and anybody who's trying to defend it. But the demonstrations are still going on in Iran, and there's widespread dissatisfaction for the regime, more and more open opposition to the regime. It's very heartening, and we can only hope that it will ultimately result in the destruction of that inhumane regime that's been there since 1979 and the restoration of one that, like the Shah, was more friendly to the United States.
Indeed, and we go back to the taking of our hostages. Those folks really never being held accountable. The Iranians sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorism throughout that region. They've been bad actors for quite some time, and yet they remain out of our reach when it comes to any type of consequences that we could put on them or their administration.
Yeah, Barack Obama, of course, he empowered Iran to a tremendous degree. And when he gave these billions to the Islamic Republic, he argued, well, this is just their money. But, what he was talking about was billions of dollars that had been delivered by the Shah's regime for an arms deal that was canceled. And Jimmy Carter, who did so much to undermine the Shah and enable the Islamic Revolution, and Reagan and the first Bush and Clinton and the second Bush, all of them said, this is not the money of the Islamic Republic. This money belongs to the Shah, and we're not going to return it to the Islamic Republic. It was Obama who decided that the money belonged to the Islamic Republic and gave it to them. And many people warned, including me at the time, that this was going to be tantamount to just giving money to terror groups, and that the money would be given by the Iranians to jihad terror groups, and that's exactly what happened. So the jihad terror groups have been significantly empowered. Trump has restored sanctions on Iran, and that's helped to some degree, but of course the money that Obama gave them cannot be recovered.
More with Robert Spencer in a minute. Traffic and weather together. KIDO Talk Radio. Kevin Miller in the morning. Good morning, Dave. Hey, thank you, Larry. Appreciate it. KIDO Talk Radio. Robert Spencer joining us. Jihadwatch.org. As we move along, so what about Iraq?
Iraq is in a mess, essentially. I tell you, Saddam Hussein was a tyrant and a brutal dictator. And I don't want to give the impression that I have any soft spot or support for Saddam Hussein, but it's undeniable because Iraq, is a fictional country. There's no Iraqi people as such. There are Sunni Arabs, there are Shiite Arabs, and there are Sunni Kurds and a small minority of Shiite Kurds in Iraq. They were 3 Ottoman provinces welded together. They never really had any essential unity among them. And so when Saddam Hussein was toppled, Iraq, there were various warring jihad groups trying to take it over. And this is essentially the situation to this day. ISIS was able to gain so much support in northern Iraq because in southern Iraq around Baghdad, you have a weak Shiite regime because the Shiites are an absolute majority in Iraq, and so they were destined to win the elections. People voted on the basis of their ethnic and religious identity, not on the basis of some Jeffersonian idea of who the best candidate was, and that was utterly predictable. So you have a weak Shiite regime in Baghdad. The Sunnis feel disempowered, and they ended up joining ISIS in large numbers. Now ISIS is gone, but the crisis is still very much with us. In Afghanistan, this is going to be something that they're going to be dealing with for many, many years, as probably until the advent of some other strongmen like Saddam Hussein, or until the country breaks up into its component parts.
And we'll cover that coming up. We'll talk a little bit about Iraq, our U.S. troops, and, of course, the history of jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. Robert Spencer is with us. Waking up on the right side, Kevin Miller in the morning. You're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning, Maggie. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. We continue on. Robert Spencer joining us. The history of jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. Boy, talking about our situation in the Middle East, Mr. Spencer, it's not. I'm trying to be optimistic here.
Well, it's good to be optimistic, but I think it's better to be realistic. And in the Middle East, there aren't any easy solutions. It's a very difficult situation that has actually been made worse by American policymakers who are insufficiently informed about the history and the culture and the religion of the region. And so they have, George W. Bush famously said that the Iraqis would welcome us as liberators. That was never going to happen, and it did not happen, and it's no surprise that it didn't happen. And it didn't because the Islamic religion does not allow for secular Western rule, the kind that George W. was talking about establishing in Iraq. It was never going to happen, and the Americans were regarded with suspicion for even talking about it or entertaining that as a possibility, and consequently we were not welcomed as liberators, and it ended up being this endless quagmire, and this is what will always happen as long as we're involved there. And so here again, we need a better way to deal with this.
Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning on KIDO Talk Radio. So obviously, Donald Trump's a lot better than former President Obama. Let me hit you with this one. How bad was Obama? How bad was his presidency a disaster when it came to keeping us safe?
Oh, certainly. Obama is I would say, the worst president in American history, the most disastrous for national security, absolutely a disgrace in pretty much every way. In the first place, take the immigration policies. He about doubled the Muslim population in the United States, brought over 1 million Muslims into the country. And you might think, well, you must be racist and bigoted if you think there's anything wrong with that. The problem is not Muslims as such. The problem is that there's no reliable way to distinguish between jihad terrorists and peaceful Muslims. And Al-Qaeda and ISIS have both instructed people to get into the United States and do so by appearing secular, not religious. Don't wear Islamic dress, don't carry around a Quran, don't go to mosque, etc. And so how are you going to deal with that in terms of vetting? He didn't. What he did was bring in an unknown number of potential jihad terrorists into the country. And this is going to have consequences for decades to come. This is just one aspect of what he did. Of course, at the same time, he's responsible for creating ISIS by his precipitous withdrawal. Now, I have been speaking on this very show about how we need to come up with better strategies for dealing with these problems than keeping our troops there endlessly. I support President Trump in wanting to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan, although he seems to have been stopped from doing both by his so-called experts. The problem is that if we withdraw in the way that Obama did, such that he announces when and everybody can know exactly when we're leaving, and does not have any adequate preparation, he doesn't have any new strategy formulated for dealing with the problem, he's just decided to ignore it and pretend it isn't there, then, well, nature abhors a vacuum, and you're going to end up with more trouble. So that's what we ended up with. ISIS formed in the vacuum that was left by the withdrawal, the precipitous withdrawal of American troops from Iraq. And then he didn't do anything about ISIS and made the rules of engagement so crippling that they couldn't deal with it adequately on the ground, militarily. That's one of the things Trump changed, which made it so easy and so quick to roll up the ISIS domains. But during Obama's administration, it looked as if ISIS was there to stay and was going to travel the path to legitimacy from terror group to a respected organization after the pattern of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And so history, if history is written by free people, will not and cannot possibly be kind to Barack Obama.
Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning. We haven't covered Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda is still very much with us. They were overshadowed for quite some time by ISIS, but Al-Qaeda is active in the United States and around the world, active in Africa in particular, and it has still has a large number of adherents, an international organization. There are loyalists of Al-Qaeda in the United States. I track jihad activity, as we discussed, at Jihad Watch Daily, and it's not infrequent that jihad news will come across the transom, somebody arrested in the United States for jihad plotting who has ties to Al-Qaeda. And so we would be naive to think that they're over and done with because we haven't heard anything spectacular from them lately.
You know, on the other hand, what concerns us, Mr. Spencer, and you've mentioned this earlier on KIDO Talk Radio, these lone wolf attacks like we saw in Boston with the Sarnoff brothers and others. How much of a concern is it to folks, whether you live in Idaho or Iowa, Indiana, or New York?
Everywhere. They have specifically called upon, Al-Qaeda and ISIS both, have specifically called upon Muslims in all areas of the country to target non-Muslims in lone wolf attacks, and they have done so. I mean, if you think about it, I think probably a lot of people don't know, but there have been murderous jihad attacks in Little Rock, Arkansas, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in San Bernardino, and so I'm not saying walk around in fear, certainly, but there is just no way to be sure anywhere that this isn't going to happen.
Robert Spencer joining us, Kevin Miller in the morning. Let's talk about your book, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. You know, what don't we know about Muhammad? Well,
I think that we don't know, most people don't know, that Muhammad was a warlord who led armies, who exhorted his followers to wage war against unbelievers, and who rewarded those who killed people who criticized him, and that these things all became part of Islamic law after the death of Muhammad and are still part of Islamic law. In the history of jihad, this is the first and only book that chronicles all of jihad's history from 1400 years, shows that everywhere Muslims have gone, there have been some who have waged war against unbelievers, and that we would be naive to think it ain't going to happen here.
Boy, very chilling when you think about it. On the other hand, in fairness, how do you balance the good Muslims? You know, we have this friction back and forth, but America has been founded on freedom of religion.
Well, I'm very glad that there are good Muslims and there's freedom of religion. These things are very important. The thing is that freedom of religion is not and never was envisioned to be some sort of license to break existing laws. Freedom of religion ends where law-breaking begins. So, for example, if my religion says that I can kill people and that serves a law, then that's something I've got to leave at the door. That's not welcome in the United States because murder is against the law. Now, if you have an honor killing, here's a very clear example. Honor killing is the practice of cleansing one's honor and the honor of one's family by killing somebody who is considered to have sullied that honor. This is an Islamic concept, and it's very common in Islamic cultures, that you have, for example, a girl who has sex out of marriage, her father finds out, he kills her. And that takes care of the problem because he has cleansed the family of the shame that she has brought upon the family by her behavior. Now, honor killing in many Muslim countries is actually penalized less than other kinds of killing. That is, if you can convince the court that you murdered for honor, and it wasn't just a murder for hatred or for revenge or pride or money or whatever, then you'll get a lighter sentence. Now, this is absolutely incompatible with American values, and so it's not a matter of freedom of religion to allow that. Another example is female genital mutilation, which is justified by some statements of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. And it's something that is practiced all over the Islamic world in many, many countries, among many Muslims, not all. And there were a couple of doctors who were put on trial last year in Michigan for performing these operations. And a judge actually threw the case out of court because it was a freedom of religion issue. Now, that is something that never should have happened in an American court. There is no freedom of religion when it comes to mutilating the body of somebody else. And this needs to be clarified. But right now, that's where it stands.
More coming up with Robert Spencer next. You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Thank you, everybody, for waking up on the right side. Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Joining us once again, the History of Jihad author, From Muhammad to ISIS, Mr. Robert Spencer, jihadwatch.org. Let's go back to this whole revolution where we have the radicals. Did that start in 79, or it just seems that we had this lull during the world wars, maybe during the Ottoman Empire? I'm sure you detail this in the History of Jihad.
Yeah, absolutely. I show how, because the Ottoman Empire was going into decline, there was less jihad. It very much became something in the background of world politics. But then the Saudis struck oil, and they started to use a lot of their billions to spread their understanding of Islam around the world, which is very virulent and violent, and they were able to do so with great success, which is one reason for the resurgence of jihad activity in the last few decades. Another is the victory of Khomeini in the Islamic Revolution in Iran, such that jihadis were empowered. They saw, look, we are able, we can win, we can destroy a government of a thriving nation state and take power and hold power. And so these two things, plus also the mass communications that are possible in the modern world. Khomeini was able to take power in Iran after sending cassette tapes of his sermons into Iran. In those days, of course, there was no internet, but his tapes of his sermons were smuggled in to Iran, and he was able to gain the support of a large number of the Iranian people on the basis of this. Wouldn't have been possible without modern technology.
More coming up with Robert Spencer. First, traffic and weather together. Let's get you to work safely and on time. Good morning, Dave. Hey, thank you, Larry. Robert Spencer with us. Kevin Miller in the morning. 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. Again, you go down to where do we go from here? We had a local college recently, a Christian college. Northwest Nazarene University actually changed their name from the Crusaders to, I think, the Nighthawks or the Night Owls or something of that nature, because they didn't like the stigma of the name Crusaders.
Yeah, well, see, this is a real big problem. This is a number that's been done upon the vast majority of people in the United States today and all over the West, that we're ashamed of our own culture, heritage, and history. I show in the History of Jihad that the Crusades are nothing to be ashamed of. Yes, the Crusaders did some things that were wrong, and to be proud of the Crusaders does not mean we're endorsing those things. But the Crusades ultimately were a small-scale defensive reaction after 450 years of jihad violence that had destroyed ancient Christian civilizations all over the Middle East and North Africa. And so the idea that there's something to be ashamed of in that, you'll never find Muslim spokesmen saying they're ashamed of the jihad conquests of the Arab empires and the early caliphates or the Ottomans. They're not ashamed. Why are we ashamed of our own history? We shouldn't be.
Indeed, and yet we are. So where does this leave us based on your research for this book, Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS? Where do we stand concerning the history and future, the future of Western civilization?
Well, those who don't value something are not going to defend it, and this is what we have to turn around, and it's very urgent that we do so. If we do not teach our children that they should value and cherish American principles and the principles of Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, then they're not going to defend these principles, and we're going to lose them. That is what we're facing now, and that is it's really a choice that's coming down very fast. There's a whole generation now of college students, young people who have been taught that America is some terrible thing, and that the West is something to despise. And we're beginning to see the consequences of this, and we're going to see a lot more in the coming years. If we don't turn this around, it's going to get a lot worse. Indeed.
Mr. Spencer, what has your life been like?
I guess I'm not sure how you're asking. Certainly I've had a lot of threats and a lot of attempts to intimidate me. Jihadis and Islamic supremacists love to traffic in intimidation. And I would say to anybody who's listening to this that, above all, you should not allow yourself to be intimidated. Just stand your ground, stand firm. This is a struggle for freedom. Our ancestors had to struggle for freedom many times, and we will have to do so again. But this is what we're in, and we need to realize it, and we all need to fight in any way that we can to defend our freedoms.
Indeed, but again, it comes at a cost to you. I mean, you've talked about it, and the idea that you could just be like the rest of us, watching sports on the weekend, working a 9-to-5 job, and just moving on. What has motivated you to keep the vigil in spite of people, threatening you?
Well, I know that what I'm saying is true. I know that it's urgent, and so, like I said at the beginning, this has to be done, and as a result, I'm in a position to do it. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I just decided, well, I'm going to get a 9-to-5 and drink beers in the evening and relax. There's important work to be done.
How do we reach the young people?
I think that only reality can break through. That if we tell them something, they have already been programmed to a tremendous degree that this is racism and Islamophobia. But reality is a powerful force. I'll tell you something. I spoke last week at UCLA, and there was a young man in the audience. They showed me his picture before the talk and said, he's going to disrupt. We've heard that he's come to disrupt the presentation. So I kept kind of an eye on him, but I just went ahead, and he didn't disrupt, but he did ask the first question, and when he asked the first question, he said, I was surprised. I came here ready to oppose everything you were saying, and you were very reasonable. And I think it's not that I'm so persuasive or intelligent, it's that he had a little bit of a reality break. Reality broke through. He heard what I was saying and realized that it was true because it matched the experiences that he's had. And so this is how we reach the young people, that we keep telling them what's true and what's real, and some of them will see it.
Finally, why should people pick up your book?
This is the only history of jihad in existence, and the old saying goes, if you don't remember your history, you'll be condemned to repeat it. This is what we're about to do. The book is, in a sense, a guide to what not to do. And so it's something that policymakers and those who elect policymakers need to know about now.
Indeed, Mr. Spencer, we appreciate it. Like I said, As we move along here on KIDO Talk Radio 107.5 FM, 580 AM, back to anything we should be looking out for when we're talking about within the Middle East, anything in Syria, anything in Iran, anything in Iraq?
Well, there's plenty in all of those places. One thing I can say is watch for the Iranian regime to fall. It's going to happen. I hope that it happens within this year. But if it doesn't happen within this year, it's going to happen within 5 years or 10 years, certainly no longer than that, unless they become even more brutally repressive than they are now. But I think we're seeing the last days of the Iranian regime. That's very exciting, very positive, and it will have many positive consequences reverberating because the Iranian regime, as I said before, finances so many jihad terror groups around the world, and they'll lose their money. And things could get so much better if the Iranian regime falls.
Well, Mr. Spencer, we appreciate you. We thank you for joining us, and you have a great day, sir.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we appreciate Robert Spencer joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning. By the way, don't forget, coming up, Glenn Beck will join us. We won't join. Glenn Beck will be here. And Glenn Beck, Dave Ramsey, Sean Hannity on your home for, the place to be heard, Idaho's talk station, KIDO Talk Radio.